Dzień dobry, witam Państwa.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome at Poland Nearing Net Zero, Modeling Decarbonization Pathways for the Polish Energy Sector and Economy up to 2040. I am Patryk Perus, and I am responsible for communication at Instrat. It's my great pleasure to have you here. Also, welcome to all of our guests following the stream. It has become sort of tradition that before Christmas every year we have a meeting with you, so it's great to see all of you, especially given that the Prime Minister is right now starting his national address. So, of course, feel free to look at your mobiles, but I hope our conference will be a bit more concrete. So now President, the CEO of Instrat, will take the floor. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I know you've come here, just like yesterday in Kinoteka, to watch the same deliberations. Don't worry, bear with us. I'm going to watch some films with you. I'm the CEO of Instrat, Michał Hetmański. It's great to see all of you in such numbers. Just briefly, for those of you that don't know, we are a think tank that reinforces the public policy with data. We've been doing that for some years now. There is 25 people within Instrat, analysts that specialize in energy, regional, social policy, and the energy sector. We are trying to analyze all the issues related to the energy transition. Therefore, these technological and energy-related insights are so important for us because we want to make this transition inclusive and just from the viewpoint of region. Therefore, we have many partnerships in the public sector, civic society, and the private sector. For sure, you are wondering how come we brought all of you today here. And I would say the following. For the over 1 year and a half, we worked on reactivating our energy model. Credits to my team, because we decided to come up with counter scenarios for the energy policy until 2040. I think it's no secret why this document has not been properly understood so far. We hope that our contribution to prepare the new energy policy for Poland and the National Plan for Energy and Climate, and here I could mention some 6 other strategic documents that Brussels ordered Warsaw to compile, and this remained without answer. So irrespective of what the new government will need to do to work on these documents, we prepared the most difficult part, which is the technical analytical contribution based on energy modeling tools. At the same time, it's great to say that the previous edition, until 2030, that was published in March, was actually quoted in the manifesto of the coalition, democratic coalition in Poland. So we hope that today's report until 2040, where we want to include different sectors, for example, electricity for transportation, regarding buildings, and hydrogen economy, will make a great complement to the knowledge that is so much needed on how the transition might end. We came up with 4 scenarios of that transition, so that decision makers can navigate through all the delays, and I'm sure there will be some delays, and we will need to take proper action. And yet, part and parcel of this is the following. Our mission as Instrat is the public interest. Now, how come? The content that we will be presenting to you today, this is a modeling report prepared by Michał Smolej, Patryk Kubijczak, and Wojciech Żelisko. Big thank you goes to those experts and all other pundits that also made a contribution. So we are presenting that report to you again as part of open data and full transparency on the input, assumptions, the model, and methodological tools. I know that's not; they are not always that easy. And we are also presenting transparent results. And we hope that this standard of openness and transparency will raise the bar for public policy making. No longer black box analyses. authors of energy strategies of the last years were not understandable properly. Therefore, there was no trust towards the policy. The draft act was half-baked. It was not properly analyzed. And we really hope that energy strategy of a state can really reflect the modern trends regarding energy market modeling. There are always mistakes in there, but we want to be ever closer to the reality. And now over to Patrick, and please follow this debate today also after the break. Thank you. Thank you, Michał. Just like you've heard before, today we have the pleasure to present our report entitled Poland Nearing Net Zero. And you can read more on our website. Also, it will be definitely covered by the media. I'm going to ask to the stage in a moment the main author, which is Patryk Kubicek. Some housekeeping first. Right now, we will hear 3 presentations. Following the 3rd presentation, we will have a Q&A session. So that means you can ask questions then. So, Patryk Kubicek, the floor is yours. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Being the main modeling expert at Instrat, my job is to understand the Polish energy transition, all the changes and opportunities, but also challenges that they come in pair with. And these changes are necessary. Right now, the energy sector in Poland is based on coal. Coal and gas accounted for about 80% of the energy mix in 2022. Now, burning these fossil fuels to produce electricity cost emission 130 million tons of CO2 last year only, which is about 1/3 of the whole emissions generated by Poland. Now, the power sector must be decarbonized. This is a big part of the emissions, but we may never ignore the remaining 2/3. And this is the topic covered by the report, that is, how you can deal with that, how to decarbonize the rest of the market. Now, what is the vision for Poland in 2040? Is it going to be a net zero Poland? Poland with energy system based on renewables or nuclear energy? Or maybe we will fall into the gas trap and we will be dependent on the imports. No one knows that, and I can't tell you that. However, what I can say is try to answer the following question: how this energy transition could look like to make it most profitable. Therefore, I'm going to elaborate on 4 scenarios that we came up at Instrat. But before that, let me tell you more about the tool, which is energy modeling, the tool that we keep working on at Instrat. And this precisely is the tool that allowed us to come up with a quantitative description of each of the scenarios. Now, what is this modeling about? First of all, we need to pick and define the system. For the needs of this analysis, we picked some sectors where fossil fuels have proper energy use. These account for about 75% of greenhouse gas emissions of Poland. Now, once we define the system, we need to compile the data using various sources. These are the data on the current energy consumption in different sectors and on existing infrastructure, and finally, technology costs now and in the future. Now, what changes our model? It's the price of CO2 emissions. All the actions related to CO2 emissions are assigned with a cost. This is the real cost that is borne as we speak by the energy and heating sector. This is the ETS system. Now, this ETS system will be expanded to include subsequent sectors in the years to come. For the modeling needs, we assume that the cost is the same in each sector. From our perspective, namely, all GHG emissions have the same impact on the climate change. Now, if you look at the cost of CO2, this is taken from the International Energy Agency. For 2040, it's about 180 euros per ton of CO2, and according to the International Energy Agency, this is the development pathway for CO2 prices that will allow us to become net zero in 2050. And Poland is a country that is bound by this goal, being part of the EU. Now, having all these assumptions and data, we are looking for the optimum solution. How to reinforce the Polish economy with the cheapest energy, including the investment costs, but also OPEX. And as I said, we are using our own model called PIPSA-PL. PIPSA-PL is an open model, so all the input data can be found within our repository. Feel free to do so. I'm not going to delve that much into detail, but you can see it's quite complex. Let me just say that there are 4 basic sectors involved: the power sector, heating, including both the system and individual part, heating, also transport, where we focus on light transport, so both trucks and passenger cars, and the hydrogen generation sector. As I said, feel free to visit our website and read more. Still, this model is just a tool. What matters is what we do with the tool. Well, based on the tool, we can come up with our scenarios. However, a model is not enough. We need some edge conditions also. So what's the difference between the individual scenarios? Well, in this case, it's the demand pathways regarding different types of energy carriers. In our case, it's electricity, heat, hydrogen, energy to power cars. Also, different scenarios involve different pace of development of different types of infrastructure. It's clear that there are some technical regulatory limitations out there that we need to respect. Also, some technical differences can also be seen. Now, the cost assumptions, however, are the same for all scenarios. And let me emphasize, each scenario is cost optimal under their own respective assumptions. So they are consistent visions of the world governed by that optimization principle. These scenarios are not forecasts. It's an idealized version of how the reality may look like in the future, and yet I think it's worthwhile to have them as signposts so that it can give us hints how to do these things cheaply. Now, scenario number 1 is the ambitious renewable energy sources and nuclear scenario, but also the so it's fast deployment of renewables, nuclear possible, and this is where we move out from cars to public transport, well, to some extent, of course. And in this scenario, the electrical car sector develops. And it's the same. So the only difference is that in scenario 2, there is no nuclear program. There is also scenario 3 called baseline scenario, where renewables can develop up to the latest unofficial forecasts of the Ministry of Climate and Environment, dated from June this year, but it hasn't become the official part of the energy policy of the state.
However, it designates certain goals and directions, and we see that the system is following it. And the 4th scenario is a slow transformation scenario where we have the RES development and nuclear power development is slow. Thermomodernization is also slow, and RES have technical difficulties in increasing their share in power production. This is the end in terms of assumptions. Now I would like to present the results. Our model is big and complex, and I could talk about it for hours, but I selected five pieces of information which seems to me most interesting, and they give the input for the power development discussion in our country. I will start with the first insight, which is wind and sun. According to our scenarios, wind and sun are the most profitable basis for the future power development of our country. In all the scenarios, sun and wind have dominating share in the energy mix, even in the slow transformation. When we develop photovoltaics and wind farms at a slower pace than assumed, then in 2040 we have a very important share of this energy. We also have the scenario without the nuclear power, and the question is, what is the power capacity? According to our assumptions in this scenario, and it is confirmed that it is cost-effective, we have 56 gigawatts of wind power and around 60 gigawatts of PV power. It seems a lot, but when we take into consideration present trends, it is a realistic scenario and realistic goal. Here you can see the baseline scenario. These are the goals according to the forecast scenario of the Ministry of Climate. The goals are lower according to those scenarios, but even if we were to reach those goals, it is still profitable. It does not show the first scenario with nuclear energy. I just want to tell you that in this scenario here, we have a little bit lower amount of wind farms, which is a little bit more dependent on the weather. And there's the question. The first scenario is based on the nuclear energy, yes? And the answer is no. The second conclusion is that nuclear energy can be part of cost-effective energy mix, but not the main pillar of it, as you have seen on the previous graphics. Now, I want to draw your attention to the light brown part. It is the nuclear energy share, and the highest share of this energy is in the baseline scenario. We can see that there is the demand for the energy, and the demand for energy is lower in the first scenario, and nuclear power is developing accordingly, but it is still 17% here. So we can't say that we will replace coal with nuclear energy, because up to 2040 there's no such possibility to do it. Why? Because the rate of construction of nuclear power blocks is limited in time, and it will take time to build it. In the first scenario, when we have RES and nuclear energy, we reach in 2040 around 5.6 gigawatt, which shows 2 years delay of the nuclear power program, and this goal seems to be optimistic. In the scenario of slow transformation in 2040, we have only one nuclear power block. What's the conclusion? The lesson learned from this is that the RES should develop irrespectively of nuclear power development, because we cannot wait with renewables for the development of nuclear. Nuclear power does stabilize the system, and it can replace coal as the base of the power mix, but nobody can offer the amount of energy that is required for the country. We cannot fully replace coal with nuclear power energy in 2040. We also have a demand for heat, and this demand will be answered to thanks to heat pumps. A few words about heat pumps. It is a cost-efficient solution. we can see increase in heat pumps in the buildings. It is a very efficient method in generating heat with the use of electricity, and in the renewable scenario, this energy is cheap and available. Here we have a example of winter days when there is demand for heat and the load of the electricity system is large, is very strong. This is the pink color at the bottom. How the system deals with it? This is the time when wind production is low and photovoltaics is also low because it's winter and we cannot expect to have lots of energy from sun in winter. How the system deals with it? The system responds thanks to the mix of various installed capacities and dispatching capacities. These are also capacities which result from our scenarios. We can see that we need this capacity. We can take it from natural gas. And from the point of view of greenhouse gas emissions, it's not the worst scenario, but we just need this energy and we have to support the system with this energy in winter days. We are going to have hydrogen power plants. Those hydrogen power plants are rarely used, but there is demand for them. I have presented the situation of difficult moments and how the system works in difficult moments. Now the situation when we have an excess of energy. The fourth conclusion is that flexible electricity consumption by sector enables wind and solar energy to be well used. Here you can see 3 days. This is May, when we have lots of wind and lots of sun. Green is wind, pink is sun, and on the bottom you can see the demand. You can see straight away that we have light blue color, this is electrolysis, and in this scenario we have around 20 electrolyzer elements, and this is 2040. So there are days when our model shows that production is around 70 gigawatts production of solar and wind energy. This is a lot. And right now our system reaches around 30 gigawatts, but this is 2040 with 70 gigawatts. So the conclusion is that electrolyzers should be located close to renewables installations because the system does not have to see all the power that is shown here, but electrolyzer is one of the methods to manage the excess energy. We also have electrode boilers. This is the red color here. We assume that we have heat warehouses, heat storage, so that we store this energy and replace it. We change it into heat and we store it and use it later on. This is what the model shows as good solution. Moreover, we also have battery stores. This is darker blue color, and the navy blue is electric cars. Our model shows that elasticity, flexibility of demand is very important, and it seems that it is good to charge cars during the day because at that point we have lots of solar power to offer. Previously, I told you that renewables and nuclear power can coexist in one system in an optimum way. Why? We don't have to worry that there's too much energy in the system, because if the energy is cheap, then there are various ways to use it, for example, electrolyzer. And I want to show you 2 extreme scenarios. This is the ambitious renewables development plus nuclear power, and the demand in 2040, when we take into consideration all the sectorial demand, is 310 terawatt-hours, and in the slow development scenario, we have 90 terawatt-hours. So in general, if we want to have ambitious energy transformation, we need to take into consideration that electricity demand will grow. Does it mean that we are going to have a huge system which will be a burden for the environment, a system that is going to be expensive? No. This is my fifth insight, which is a good sum up. Ambitious renewable scenarios lead to lowest emissions and lowest systemic costs. We look at all the emissions from all the sectors. My discussion was very focused on the power sector, electricity sector, but we count emissions from all the sectors. And it turns out that in the ambitious ambitious scenarios for renewables development, we can see the strongest drop in emissions. And in the sectors that we have analyzed, I want to remind you that 75% of all Polish emissions, and we can see a drop by 68% in 2040 compared to what we have today. Is it a lot or not? Well, it depends. In the European Union right now, we discussed the goal for 2040, a goal for emissions reduction. The baseline year is 1990, and this is how we wanted to translate and show the goals in those sectors. And when we take the baseline of 1990, the goals are at the level of 80–90%. And can we talk about Poland nearing net zero? Yes, Poland will be on a good road to reaching net zero. Is it going to be costly? It turns out that in our scenarios of ambitious renewables development, we can see the average unit cost of production of energy, and it is lower by around 100 Polish zlotys compared to the slow transformation scenarios. We're going to have a period of strong investments in the 30s, for example, and the cost will be higher in 30s, but the faster the transformation, the faster the cost drops. We are going to have increased power capacity installed, and we will generate cheap energy. And we are looking at the whole system. And I don't show you costs of particular technologies. I just show you the average cost of all the system. This is how we should look at the power transformation. I also don't present the price shock and the increase in energy prices of previous years. And this is also a long-term analysis. That's why I decided to pick this point as the starting point for this analysis. Renewables development, the ambitious scenario shows us the systemic cost. This is what we optimize. And savings. I want to say that we do not take into consideration the cost of network, the grid development, because this is complicated and difficult. We don't have data here. The dispatching grid, dispatching capacities, and all the network calculations are a difficult part of to capture proper and pinpoint all the data. So renewables are cheapest, and they open new possibilities for our economy. One such opportunity is the green hydrogen economy. Maybe green hydrogen is the missing element of our green transformation, and you will hear about it from Wojciech Żelisko. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Wojciech Żelisko. I am an analyst in the Instrat Foundation, and I work on the Polish hydrogen economy of Poland. There are many uncertainties here in terms of its future shape. Some uncertainties will be presented and answered to based on our modeling scenarios. In the beginning, we should answer the question, why should we deal with hydrogen sector at all? Why our foundation and Instrat Foundation offered a modeling of it. We can discuss three elements here: scale and importance of the systems. The first one, domestic hydrogen production is 1 million tons today. Today it is the gray hydrogen which comes from natural gas, and the production of 1 million tons gives us the third location in the European Union. This hydrogen is used in refinery and petrochemicals, and it is respective to crude oil and ammonia transformation. And we can see that hydrogen is going to be a tool of decarbonization, a tool of emissions reduction in sectors such as heavy industry and heavy transportation. We also believe that there is a need of answering certain convictions, because there are certain contradictory visions concerning proper development of hydrogen economy. And our modeling is to be the signpost which will allow to look at the situation and have some critical approach to certain visions. We know what is the goal, and now I'm going to tell you how we took into consideration hydrogen in our modeling. Our model assumes twofold production of hydrogen. First of all, it is the gray hydrogen, which I have mentioned, produced from natural gas. The second method of production we take into consideration is the green hydrogen. Green hydrogen is produced in the electrolysis process, and we take energy from the power grid. Now, electrolyzers power development. We take into consideration the goal from the Polish hydrogen strategy for 2030. This is the 2 gigawatts of electric power in electrolyzers, and for the coming years, for next years, the development of power is through optimization of all the modeled systems. We need to emphasize the optimization here of all the modeled system, but it's not only the hydrogen system. In the assumptions, we do not take into consideration the auxiliary systems. For example, the CFDS, and we do not take into consideration the import of this power element from abroad. The more ambitious our scenarios, the biggest demand, the highest the hydrogen production. This hydrogen is used in our scenarios in industry sector, in heavy transport sector, and marginally in the electricity sector. Now let's move to the results of our modeling. The starting level is electrolyzer power optimized from the point of view of the systems. In our scenarios, we have difference in the production potential of green hydrogen, and the scope, the range is in the up to 1.2 million tons in the ambitious development of renewables and nuclear power. The potential of green hydrogen production depends on the level of the use of electrolyzers and the availability of clean energy. Now I'd like to provide the context for those numbers. Present use of gray hydrogen in Polish economy is 33 terawatt hours.
So we looked at the results of modeling. What conclusions can be drawn? Well, the electrolyzers will be used to the minimum extent. That means 2030, which implies high production costs of green hydrogen, which can influence the issues of support programs and hydrogen imports, or, for example, CFDs that I mentioned before. Also, it will have, as I said, influence on potential imports. Now, green hydrogen will actually be like a screwdriver and not a Swiss Army knife. What I mean by that is that gray hydrogen can't be fully replaced by the green one in any of the scenarios. That means limited availability of hydrogen for new applications. Now, with the development of Polish hydrogen economy, we can see that it will be dependent on whether there will be a success in the energy transition. However, it may not be a goal in itself. The point is rather that we never want to cannibalize the renewable capacities that could be used in other sectors and that could push out these excessive emissions from the economy. So let me sum up the presentation by quoting and sharing with you some recommendations. Well, the criteria for utilizing green hydrogen should be simplicity, understood as simplicity of how infrastructure will be adjusted to green hydrogen, but it's also about the potential to mitigate emissions. Now, priority applications could be heavy industry and heavy transport that I mentioned before. Moreover, we believe that the Polish hydrogen strategy should include an evaluation of potential and production costs of green hydrogen so that we can make it more viable and so that we can have better goals for each sectors, because this is missing right now in the current hydrogen strategy. Looking at high component costs of hydrogen, not only the generation costs, but also transport and storage, we can see an opportunity for the Polish hydrogen economy. It can be done in a decentralized manner. For example, by the emergence of the so-called hydrogen valleys. Now, the beginning of the Polish green hydrogen economy, however, will need to face some tough start because state subsidies might at the same time accelerate or slow down the growth. And yet, before 2030, clean energy will be needed somewhere else. So now coming back to the initial thesis of that potential, will hydrogen be the missing link in Polish decarbonization? Yes. But at the same time, there will be not enough of it. It will be missing indeed. So it can't form the foundation for the Polish energy transition. Rather, it can complement it. Now, the remaining conclusions on the Polish strategy will be shared by my colleague Michał Smoleń, head of the Energy and Climate Program at Instrat. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you. It's been great listening to my colleagues. Indeed, the next step, that is conclusions for the Polish transition strategy. This is what I'm going to cover. Right now, we are at a breakthrough moment. 2030 is not that far away. So we frequently hear that this is really the final call to start some big investments. Of course, there will be some other investments out there, such as nuclear power plants. It will take a lot of time. But if you think about grid, about onshore, offshore renewables, especially offshore wind, then the year 2030 is really very, very close. Now, at the same time, the current strategies missed clear goals and consistency. The future of the Polish grid will be dependent on increasing interdependencies between sectors. There will be more and more complications that we will need to face. Right now, we have the conventional energy that answers different demand in different points of the year. It proves us also some reserve capacities, backup capacities. However, it can become very complex. There will be moments in the year where we will have a lot of energy and the moments where we will have a deficiency in renewable energy. Therefore, we need to have a clear strategy on how we can make the system stable. Unfortunately, the Polish approach does not reflect that. We miss consistency. If you look at hydrogen-related conclusions, 2 gigawatts of hydrogen in 2030, 2 gigawatts in electrolyzers. Well, electrolyzers, if they can be activated when this makes sense for the system, yes, but right now they are not used at all. So we have this ambitious plan to develop hydrogen economy, but this strategy was based on a very unambitious renewable strategy. So there are many contradictions there. Right now in Poland, hundreds of thousands of households still use the old method of settling PV installations. It was very favorable. It accelerated the development of PV uptake in Poland. And at the same time, it means that we have a big group of users for whom flexibility of offtake will not be significant because they will be settled anyway. They treat the grid as their storage. And unfortunately, with the lapse of time, storage of energy and supplying energy to those black winter windless nights will be a problem. Therefore, we need to properly adjust offtake to these phenomena. Therefore, we believe that we will make a valuable contribution. Look at the strategic documents. For the year 2040, it really makes no sense to ignore the topic of supply flexibility. And you saw that in the results presented in June, where it was assumed that renewable energy sector will grow much faster. At the same time, especially the offshore wind sector, like 18 gigawatts for 2040. This is indeed an ambitious plan, and we welcome that. However, this flip side of the system was not included, and therefore now we can see the forecasts that presume that we will lose 40% of the renewable energy in 2040 because we can't make use of it in a flexible way. Therefore, we need to be ready. Also, we need to be ready to engage in social dialogue. So far, we talked about the future of coal regions and about cities, communities, less affluent groups of the society, but we based these discussions on wrong scenarios that were far away from the EU goals and from economic rational assumptions, also referring to the price. And after the first days of the new government, we can already say that the topics with accelerated energy transition will be very controversial. We will see different clashes, for example, among the miners, but also other affected communities. So we will need to prove the benefits that come attached with the new transition, but we also need to be very candid about the challenges that we will need to face. Therefore, let me sum up some main conclusions for the transition strategy. And first of all, let me stress once again, there is no alternative to fast development of solar and wind power. Someone could say maybe nuclear power could be an answer, or maybe it's the bioenergy. Well, this ambitious scenario number one, involves quick development of renewables and nuclear power. You can see that here, but at the same time, have a look at the first bar. This is for the year 2040, but no, this is for the year 2030 on the slide, and this renewable development will come first. So that means until 2030, it will be mainly renewables. And this means that also the grid needs to be properly expanded. And that's the toughest challenge. We want to anticipate certain doubts. People may say, are you really aware of how much the grid must be, but also the distribution and transmission grids must be expanded? Yes, we realize that, and we know that that's the largest challenge for this term of the government. It requires new funds, but it also requires a very brand new model so that we can make these goals truly happen, also from the viewpoint of companies, employees, but also smoothly running state administration so that permits can be granted fast. But that's not the only barrier to renewables, but it definitely will be one of the issues. So the capacity expansion is the one thing, but it needs to go hand in hand with other tasks that the state must fulfill. So renewables until 2030, and then it will be continued. Now, topic number 2. We need a more flexible system. And that's something that we believe should be included more in the strategy, but also in the official modeling. Right now, when you have a look at the presented results by the ministry, well, you can't tell what type of limitations to flexibility there will be presumed. Do they believe, the people at the ministry, that we still need 8 gigawatts of active coal and gas capacities during the summer and 10 in the winter? Is it still the same for 2030 or 2040? We don't know. So that means planning is quite limited. State institutions do take some actions, and we see changes also at the level of the EU. They encourage more flexibility, but this should be properly reflected in the strategies, because we need to have a more flexibility. In 2040, we assume that the share of non-synchronic sources, the wind and solar ones, will account for 95%. If it's smaller or much smaller, then we will need to activate coal and gas units more frequently. There are countries that already set such goals for themselves. If you look at Ireland, they started with the share of 55%, and now it's 75%. Mainly it's the wind energy, but they're also planning for the year 2030 to achieve about 95%. So that's one form of flexibility. But flexibility could also mean more supply that can be adjusted to actual conditions. You can see here a chart showing during 40 hours within the year. Pick 40 hours during the year when the production of solar and wind power is the highest. Now what happens then? You have more than 50 gigawatts of consumption from electrolyzers, heat pumps, batteries, including electric car batteries. This, not all of that will go through the system, because that would be a big challenge. Big part of it will be generated and consumed locally. But if we can't improve that, we will face losses that we will need to incur. So we need transition to use wind and the sun. And as I said, there is no alternative. We need to develop the solar and the wind sectors. In the 2030 scenario, we need to also have proper storage facilities. They will be of crucial importance. We need to increase flexibility within the whole system, and we would like to phase out gradually the continuous operation of conventional power units. So here we are talking about moving to gas or engine-based solutions. So as I said, we also need to work on flexible supply side. That should be part of our strategy, and that should also lead to more analyses by the government and different institutions, because that will translate into individual strategies and legal acts. Limitations to the grid and flexibility, well, this is not something that can't be solved. If energy can't especially the peak energy, can't go through the grid, we always have storage facilities to fall back on so that the energy can be stored and properly transported. Now, electrolyzers. Electrolyzers will be used more and more frequently in case we can't send energy to customers located far away. Cable pooling, hybrid installations, connected to electrolyzers and batteries. These are also solutions that can facilitate connecting all these capacities to the grid. Sometimes we will lose some excess, some surplus energy and some flexibility, but generally it's also an option. Plus, there are also different options that make sense if you have a lot of renewables, like PV installations west-east to flatten the peak, but also you can support locating wind energy in some very unobvious sites. Right now, when you talk about the auctions where we don't have any locations, it makes sense to put up wind farms there where the wind is the strongest. But with the lapse of time, it will be precious for the system also that there is not that much of the energy, but that this energy is generated closer to the site where your customer is located. Hence, you will decrease production, but you will increase the flexibility, so that can also be positive. This needs to be taken into account as well. Now, something that also needs to be faced is the fact that we have a big demand for dispatching capacities. Even in the ambitious scenarios for 2040, the nuclear and non-nuclear, it's still 16 to 17 gigawatts in coal and gas. As part of it, 3.6 gigawatts from hydrogen power plants. This is a lot. This is the power and the capacity that is necessary to make sure we have energy during winter peaks. Throughout the most of the year, heat pumps use clean energy, and it is profitable. But since we can't have any blackouts on winter days, these power plants need to be backup option, but they produce no more than 5 to 8% of the whole mix. Remember also that nuclear energy will not that much influence the system. It will change a little bit, and still conventional blocks will be only activated. It will be difficult for such capacities to keep their head above the water. Therefore, it's the energy market or systemic services, or maybe sometimes we need to simply agree with the situation that the prices in the market will grow up. Then yet that growth in the price will not be that high, hopefully. Also, certain mechanisms of intervention will be necessary to achieve these solutions that makes more sense from the viewpoint of the system. If we want to have fewer capacities, then it may limit, for example, heat pumps. Heat pumps are great because they push out fossil system furnaces from the system. Now, as part of that cake that becomes smaller and smaller for gas, we should phase out coal as fast as possible. You can see here coal and natural gas for hydrogen production and energy production on these two charts. And it makes sense to really phase out coal as soon as possible in 2030. Each new gas power plant will simply steal the coal market. The final existing power plants will also cover the peak demand, and they are in the system only because they are activated very rarely. So it makes no sense to replace them with gas units. You can see that the increase for natural gas, you can see an increase for the demand of natural gas, but then following 2030, it starts dropping. This modeling does not include all of the elements, like, for example, issues related to the supply security. Indeed, we have quite a lot of the coal in Poland, not that much gas. 80% of the natural gas needs to be imported, and yet some actions taken in recent years, like the Baltic Pipe and different international agreements, ensure these supplies to some extent. Now, when you plan the strategy, you need to bring that in, but be aware that if you wish to keep the coal alive for some social reasons or security reasons, this will increase the use, increase the prices and the emissions. In some scenarios, coal will be phased out even more quickly. However, the economic bill is very clear. So in 2030, the only coal-based solutions will be restricted to some industry-limited solutions, which we are not working that much on in our report. As you can see, in the year 2030, it's 15 million tons for energy purposes. So it's really a fracture, a little part of the current part. Now, for gas, it's 30 to 34 billion cubic meters, but then it drops. If you look at the possibility of quick transition, well, even in the slow scenario, it is important to curb emissions in those hard-to-abate sectors. And number one here, it's bar one. It's the year 2020. And indeed, actually, electricity is dominant. Then the red bars related to heat in 2040, they only account for a negligible part of the production. So when it comes to hydrogen, we can also limit that.
Especially in the ambitious scenarios and to a smaller extent in the slow transformation, because there's not much energy for electrolyzers in the slow scenarios. Then we also have other energy solutions, for example, in the industry, and we also have light-duty vehicles. And in our scenario, then the vehicle electrification transformation takes part. It's not revolutionary, but there is the movement from individual transport to public transportation, and the amount of diesel vehicles in 2040 is still considerable due to slow rate of replacement in Poland. Many vehicles that are active in 2040 are active right now. They are on the streets, and they will be responsible for a large part of our greenhouse gas emissions. They will require further interest, further attention, and strategic planning. Vehicle transportation electrification is something that goes hand in hand with transformation in electricity, and it also responds to demand, it responds to supply, and we have the possibility to use vehicle batteries as a electricity power storage which is available. Around 10% of power that comes to vehicles comes back to the system in difficult moments. So we will see how it develops from the technical side and what is the final total of this formula. And we will have many gigawatts of power stored in vehicle batteries, and it will be used for various purposes, and it will also be used in the system, and it will increase flexibility. This is the end of my presentation. I'd like to emphasize that our analysis, especially the analysis up to 2040, do not offer a full set of answers to any questions. It is just a picture of how it can work, and all those pictures require further in-depth analysis. We have the need of a stronger analytic tool and apparatus so that we can offer more precise results. So far, transformation was, in a way, simple. Every terawatt-hour produced from solar energy or wind energy was calculated one-to-one with the energy produced from coal up to 2040. Later on, it will not be a one-to-one calculation. We'll have to focus on the stability of the system and cost effectiveness. Thank you very much for these presentations. And I think that we can give you a round of applause for it. Thank you very much. I want to remind you that all that has been mentioned here are the conclusions from the report of Poland nearing net zero, available on our Instrat website. Now I would like to invite you to our Q&A part, and I would like to invite Patrick and Wojtek to join us here on the stage. Now we have 20 minutes to have an open discussion with you here in this room, The discussion will concern the conclusions of the report. If you want to ask a question, raise your hand. Please introduce yourself and inform us about the organization you represent. We will answer your questions straight away, and I will provide the microphone. Please speak to the microphone. I would like to encourage you to ask questions. I can see one person here. I will come up to you and I will give you the microphone. Rafał Bajczuk, Institute of Reforms, Instytut Reform. I have 3 comments. I hope that authors will be able to refer to it. First of all, I'd like to congratulate you on your great report and on your fantastic presentations. And my comments are as follows. First of all, there is the modeling in the high use of renewables energy scenario that is modeled here. There were 2 types of storing the excess energy. One was electric vehicles, and the second was the electrolyzers. I would like to question those 2 technologies. First of all, vehicles as power storage do offer such a theoretical possibility. But right now, the regulators do not want to use it. They are not. They don't say it as a good place for storing power, because such cars would have to be more expensive. They would have to have 2-side, 2-directional chargers. We don't have it yet, and we don't even know whether it will be with us in 2040. And electrolyzers, here, I also have certain doubts. In Europe, hydrogen production is and will be very expensive, and we can see the proof for it. European countries look for hydrogen suppliers outside of Europe. A German government signed contract with Namibia for Namibia to produce hydrogen and bring it and ship it to Europe, and there are many such examples. The question is it possible at all in Poland to purchase this expensive electrolyzer for Poland and produce hydrogen? Why such an expensive tool would produce power only in certain hours and not continuously to benefit from such upfront costs to produce hydrogen? And my last question is, did you try to look at the cost of power grid at every scenario you presented? Because the power production cost is the lower part of cost of power production. The larger part of cost is the power grid. Thank you very much. I will start to answer your question, and then we will hear details. And we'll start from electric vehicles. Electric vehicles are much more important as flexible demand rather than 2-directional storage for energy. We do have such a possibility, but there's the cost. Therefore, we would use it to a lower extent compared to regular batteries. But there is a question mark here. If we don't do it, if we don't benefit from it, the transformation will not be as efficient as we would like it to be. And power storage, even in 2040, do not have important impact on giving up the peak dispatching capacities. There are certain days when we don't have proper weather for producing renewables, so the storage space increases. If we don't have this solution, then biomass and nuclear power will be used to a larger extent. I agree with your question mark here. There are certain elements which are not well developed right now, and maybe we will develop it in a further future. Now, electrolyzers. The answer is that the production of hydrogen starts late because it starts only at the point when it makes sense, and it concerns power which would otherwise which otherwise would not be used. Now the question is, as you have mentioned, the purchase of a electrolyzer is expensive, and is it cost efficient to make it operate on a non-continuous basis in 2040? We can say yes, because in the remaining hours, the increased production from electrolyzers would be linked with costs above hydrogen. So it doesn't make sense from the economic point of view, but it would work there where it would make sense from the point of view of costs. Our approach to hydrogen is that we do not assume the development of hydrogen per se, and it is a different approach than in the European Union. The European Union wants to develop the hydrogen power, and they want to subsidize it, but our analysis shows that in 2030, the operation of electrolyzers in Poland has negative impact on the cost and emission of the whole system. This power should be used to move out natural gas from the energy mix. I would like to refer to the question concerning the use of electrolyzers. When we are in 2040, we can see that their use is at the level of 30 up to 40%. So we can talk about excess power, but it's not really the point, because there is the demand for hydrogen there, and we need to respond to this demand to phase out the gray hydrogen that we use right now. We do not take into consideration import here, and we didn't want to complicate our whole analysis with it. So we didn't take it into consideration here. Now, grid, yes, we do not take into consideration this grid in our scenarios, in our modeling, because there is no alternative for the construction of grid for solar and wind energy. If we were to take into consideration this cost, the direction of change would be the same. Renewables increase every 5 years, and the modeling shows whether investment in renewables makes sense every 5 years. And the model in all the years comes to 2040 with nuclear power, where we can see that the wind energy offshore investments and development stops. Up there, we stay at the level of 18. So this is a lot. This is a huge number. The result is such that even if we put more burden on the grid, the change is still viable. But the risk element here is the rate of investment. The cost is still worthwhile to be incurred compared to burning coal, which is increasingly costly. But the barrier we see in given modeling here is the rate of the development of particular renewable sources. There are barriers at the distribution grid and access. In order to analyze it, we would need to have access to data showing it, and this data is not available even to those who plan it right now in the government, because we do not have precise data here. Even due to the strategy of government, there are certain institutions which undertook certain steps to so that we can afford more renewables. And it was a good movement, a good step forward, and a beneficial element of the years we've had, because stakeholders can see that renewables are beneficial and they want to go to this direction, toward this direction. But it is a great challenge because we do not have an operating market right now. In various cases, such markets do exist or they are operating, and we can introduce them as well. But there's also the question of the model and the questions concerning how to forecast this, how to model this, how to design it, how to make a new framework for all these activities. Wojtek, do you want to provide more details? Maybe we can move on to other questions. I encourage you to ask further questions. Please raise your hand. I have a few questions. Could you introduce yourself? Andrzej Janiszewski, Alpaca Center. Good afternoon. I have few questions. I wanted to analyze the data you presented, and the question is that I find it difficult to see values in terms of installed capacity in electrolyzers in comparison to the demand of electrolyzers for electricity, and at the end of what was said, the use of electrolyzers is at the 30–40%. If I look here, I can see that the installed power in electrolyzers is 3.3 gigawatts, and I want to understand it well. It's 2040 in S1 scenario. And the number of the table? This is the first graph, page 18 of your report. I can't see whether this is the power of this is the production power. That's 3.3 gigawatts on the production side. This is the hydrogen power plant. What is it? Well, these are the hydrogen power plants, and they burn hydrogen instead of natural gas. But it seems that they are just natural gas power plants. And what is the electrolyzers installed power? How many of them there are? The power is around 20 gigawatts. I have the question, do you have any information what happens if this scenario is realized in the European Union? How many gigawatts in electrolyzers should be installed in the European Union? No, we don't have it. We don't assume import here, so the use of hydrogen is restricted here. It is a bit higher than we have today, and electrolyzers are used, first of all, to phase out gray hydrogen from the system. Today, in the Polish system, we have 0 megawatts of electrolyzers. Yes, that's true. The trick here is that our hydrogen scenario is much less ambitious than the official European Union scenario for hydrogen. In Poland, we have the Polish hydrogen strategy, and in this document, we have 2 gigawatts for 2030 from hydrogen. And we wanted to look into it and see how it turns into things to do. But if you ask me if we have 2 gigawatts of hydrogen power in 2030, I would answer that we will not have it, and it's not sensible for Polish economy. Yes, but in the coming 10 years, we are going to have 20 gigawatts from 2030 up to 2040. Yes, but if you look at the European Union goals, they assume the development of hydrogen power in the new sectors. So within the model, I assume that you calculated values concerning renewables, and you looked at the full cost of hydrogen production when you assumed 30% of use. Have you looked at the investment of electrolyzers? Yes, it's more beneficial than the gray hydrogen from natural gas in 2040. And what's the price for natural gas in 2040? Well, I think you have this number at the back of the report, at the end of the report. And there is also the cost of 180 euro for authorization for it, for purchase of it. I just want to tell you that when we compare it to the Polish official hydrogen strategy and the European hydrogen strategy, our hydrogen scenario is conservative because it assumes that we have more electrolyzers to a broader scale only when it makes sense for the whole system. And we have to be aware that the European Union plans to invest lots of money for electrolyzers to be with us earlier, and they want to subsidize it, even though from the point of view of the system it doesn't make sense in terms of the cost. Another question concerning hydrogen, the storage of hydrogen. Have you think it over where such infrastructure should be placed compared in reference to the transportation of hydrogen? Right now, we don't have such infrastructure. And another element, all the systems in the European Union supporting hydrogen are the horizontal systems for countries. We do not have baskets here. And there are countries which have more sun and wind, and they are more predisposed for cheaper hydrogen, and they will be ahead of Poland. So where would we take money for hydrogen in Poland? So a part of our demand for hydrogen will be satisfied through import of it. And we have to be aware that the price of hydrogen depends on certain elements. First of all, when we have the first gigawatt of electrolyzers, they operate with higher capacity. When we add electrolyzers, we face cannibalization because the energy to consume occurs less frequently. Consequently, it makes sense here. Otherwise, we would have a huge curtailment of electrical energy. And electrolyzers, apart from heaters, which store heat, are the last elements in these systems. Therefore, in slow transformation scenarios, hydrogen is developed in a slower rate.
For 2030 scenario, green hydrogen economy is virtually non-existent, precisely because the new energy goes to heat pumps, whereas hydrogen is final in this line before curtailment of switching off panels. And this is off the mic. Yes, indeed, we calculated, and apparently the current gas caverns could be proper as to their size. There is not that much of this hydrogen right now. Now, another interesting example that we didn't take into account to face the issues related to transport is by further conversion into ethanol, for example, but that costs more energy, but then it's easier to store it in the form of ethanol. So we don't need that much of these storage facilities if the industry will offtake this energy. Hydrogen should not be stored for a long time. So we rather are talking about the demand from the industry that will be continued. 2 comments from you, and we will move on. Just briefly, making a reference to that question about the hydrogen infrastructure. Indeed, we are not modeling transmission of hydrogen, but it does make sense to have these centers locally. Now, as to the storage topic, indeed, there are gas caverns, quite sizable ones out there, and our estimates show that if we want to have continuous supply of hydrogen throughout the year, we would use just a share, like several % of these caverns. So not that all the caverns would be now filled with hydrogen only. No, just several % of them, and it's quite cheap. Right. Now, let's maybe continue this hydrogen discussion then during lunch or during informal discussions. If I interpret properly your answer, Andrzej, you are quite skeptical, aren't you, towards the hydrogen economy? So we are actually on the same side, the analysts and you, the leaders of the hydrogen economy, right, in Poland? All right, ladies and gentlemen, the final question now, please. We have only time for one question. I think you were first, sir.
Thank you very much. My name is Frank van der Pieterman from the Dutch Embassy. Very insightful remarks have been made today, and I was wondering, I was especially excited about the first presentation where it was said that renewable energy sources are cost competitive and that it's basically better for everybody if we make this transition. On the other hand, also, Michal, wondering, given that a lot of these costs are on the short-term hurdles, what policy recommendations you would give to the government to kind of smooth these hurdles in order to also make it profitable as soon as possible, and as such also garner public support for them. Thank you.
Ja tylko poproszę o udzielenie odpowiedzi.
I will answer the question in Polish, and it will be translated into English, okay? Right, so you're talking about the challenges for conventional capacities, or are you rather driving at the energy crisis? Which problem did you mean, sir?
The problem that if we want to make this energy transition, then it requires a lot of initial hurdles, such as investments in grid and storage, etc., etc.
Yes.
And the policy recommendation based on those, how to smoothen those hurdles in order to make the energy transition as smooth as possible.
Well, a part of the challenges that we quoted are answered to some extent, for example, by the EU funds. We hope that some investments will be launched based on the EU funds, also for the hydrogen economy. But if you think about the grid, there is also room there for EU funds. However, what we also need is a change in the approach to tariffs, power tariffs. The existing situation, it's not the most desired one. There are benefits from moving quickly to heat pumps, but at the same time, if you look at the current makeup, the prices for gas are frozen. Also, gas burned at home is not burdened with emission prices, whereas it is the case for electricity. So a change that needs to happen to encourage positive changes is of huge significance. And for sure, we will need to figure out how to combine the market conditions in such a way that we encourage certain acts. At the same time, we need to protect fragile groups that are threatened with energy poverty. As to the grid, well, the grid right now is subject not as much to market conditions as building new renewable sources, for example. So I'm talking about big change that needs to happen to the model of the Polish energy sector. I think full stop needs to be put here. You feel free to continue the discussion later on. We now will have a 25-minute coffee break. And following this break, we will have a great panel by Justyna Piszczatowska from one of the internet portals.
Whatever you want to do, let me be good to you. I wanna hold ya, squeeze ya, do all I can for you. I wanna love ya.
Państwa, witam serdecznie.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome you after the coffee break on the second part of our conference, Poland Nearing Net Zero. It is my great pleasure to be the host of the panel part of our meeting. It is a great time for this discussion. I think that today we all count very strongly on new opening in terms of transformation and investment in renewables and coordination of the whole process, because today is a very special day. And we need to combine energy security with care for climate. Consequently, I'd like to invite Piotr Arak to participate in the discussion. Piotr Arak is the director of the Polish Economic Institute, and I know that he is here in this room. He will join us in a minute. Online, we are going to have Aleksandra Barańska with us. She is a member of the cabinet of the Vice President of the European Commission, Maroš Šefčovič. Ms. Aleksandra, we would like to welcome you here, and I would like to invite Michał Smoleń, head of the Energy and Climate Research Program in the Instrat Foundation. He is the co-author of the report and project, and Joanna Wispielewicz, head of market development in Ørsted, Polska. We are also going to have with us Grzegorz Mońchimowski, the expert of the Civic Institute, one of the authors of the energy program of the Civic platform. Piotr Arak is coming to us here. We would like to welcome you. Good morning. It was a family emergency. That's why I'm late a few minutes. Such emergency always occur on unwanted time. I'd like to ask you a few questions. The Polish Economic Institute has its own modeling, own results, and you have dedicated lots of work in recent years to have forecasts concerning transformational challenges. Please tell us how would you comment the results of the report you've seen today? Where are the similarities? Where are the differences in respect to your forecast? 84% of renewable energy share seems to be a lot, doesn't it? Yes, I would even say that this scenario, this presentations presented all the scenarios which are very optimistic concerning timeline for adopting renewables. It is an assumption which, even in the baseline scenario, is present. The slow transformation scenario, when the price of energy is to be 376 Polish zlotys, assumes that we have 71% of renewables, and power energy, electricity policy of Poland assumes 60% of Poland. So the slow transformation seems to be faster than conservative forecasts from Kobize, who prepared analysis and data for the document which was analyzed by Council of Ministers in Poland. So it seems to be a very good picture. It's good to show positive picture, show the share of renewables in the future, which is considerable, but it is also important to pay attention to challenges. When we publish our documents, we pay attention to status quo as well. So we look at the present situation, and we look beyond the expert environment to look into the debate concerning electricity. We also look at the debate among people who provide arguments other than expert knowledge. So we have the Kyoto Protocol and renewables all over the world. There are many people who work in the power sector. We also have mines and miners. There are many arguments which are not convincing. but they are taken up by people who vote. Therefore, we always present the status quo scenario, which is not slow transformation. It is rather a scenario showing the results, even though we continue doing things that we shouldn't be doing. For example, the subsidy for the coal sector. It seems absurd, but we're doing it, and we take into consideration such activities in our scenarios. We cannot exclude such decisions taken by our government. We don't know what our government will do in the coming 8 years. We do not know this for certain. Consequently, forecasts are charged with mistakes, and because we should have as conservative scenarios as possible, because those scenarios are most probable. We have conservative forecasts, and we assume that maybe renewables will have larger share in the future, and we need to be prepared for the positive scenario as well. I'd like to draw your attention to one more issue. In the report, we saw one element presented at the end. I do not want to criticize it, but it is critical for decision makers. This is the information concerning costs. The scenario of renewables plus nuclear power plants is around 3 trillion Polish zlotys of upfront investment, renewables 1 trillion. Baseline scenario is the 900 billion, and slow transformation scenario assumes 60% of renewables, which is ambitious in my point of view, and it's 600 billion Polish zlotys. And this is only upfront investment, so there's no ETS here. And it shows that we should take into consideration the ETS costs so that we can show this to decision makers. We can show those scenarios to decision makers because on the scenario presented here, decision makers cannot take it into consideration in their work because not all the costs is taken into consideration. It is important to have more analysis and energy mixes, because so far we only looked into one energy mix because only one was on the table, and we need to have more scenarios to compare them. I would like to ask for more details concerning one issue. You shared with us information just like expert economists. You said that there are several models and that there are conservative forecasts to be taken into consideration. When we talk about status quo, I'd like to ask whether today we have time, it's a good time to say that the PEP 2040 program requires update, irrespective of how progressive we are in our modeling. Can we clearly say today that the forecast that we have today require updating in terms of renewables for 2030-2040? It's a question to me, yes? Yes, of course. Yes, first of all, we have already prepared update, and it was not adopted by the Council of Ministers, so we will have to offer it once again to the new Council of Ministers, and this document will be updated. In recent years, we have seen accelerated adoption of renewables on the market. If the wave continues at the present rate, we could have more ambitious scenarios. And it's important to have it reflected in the document. Another element of update of the electricity program of Poland, which is well visible right now, it is the question of SMR nuclear power plant. It is assumed to be operating in 2030. When we look into expert environment, we offered foresight concerning SMR. There is a group of people, there was a group of people who answered when the nuclear power plant, in their opinion, will be operating, and they all provided 2038. Today, the experts environment cannot say that this date is realistic. So from 2030 up to 2040, we have a long period of power challenges. We have growing renewables share, the mix with coal, with ETS, and in addition, we have ETS 2 for a part of sectors. There is also natural gas, which is still widespread in Poland. And what is going to be the final shape of the mix in the coming decade? We don't know. It is a great question mark because we still need to wait for the new final solution at least 10 years. Do you want to comment it? Yes, I will share a short comment concerning optimism. We prefer to say that our scenario is ambitious. We do not forecast things. It's very ambitious. Yes, it is very ambitious. However, it assumes slower renewables development compared to, for example, other institutions. Yes, of course. So it is ambitious, but still on the side of feasible goals. And I encourage you to look into it because we indicate the systemic costs, taking into consideration variable costs. And we also offer the most ambitious scenario, which in which we can pick energy sources which are most cost efficient. There is a huge segment of grid investment which complicates the whole image, but not to the point where renewables would not be cost efficient. Now, another question. Based on the scenarios you have presented, we can see that there's a natural consequence in the form of discussion on the future power policy of our country. When we synthesize all the analytical work performed by you, we would like to ask the question, I would like to ask the question on what should be the priorities of our new government. I think that the main goals of the strategy would be to clarify the objectives to achieve, and it should be written down in regulation, because today we had the reverse. Sometimes the companies had, they were more ambitious or more realistic in their cost assumptions than the government. Of course, it's better than nothing, but it was all upside down, and lack of coherence was the result. We need to specify more ambitious goal for renewables. Second of all, we should look into development of infrastructure. We will talk about grid here. And we will discuss some very concrete details concerning development of grid. It is a huge challenge, I have already mentioned. And I think that today we have a very strategic moment where we seriously think about feasibility and moving out of our present baseline, especially in long-term perspective, because in 2030s, according to the scenario concerning curtailment, we can see that the data and the situation is not very realistic. What is important is the analysis, the background. We need to analyze demand for various systemic services which are needed in our system. And in terms of renewables, it doesn't translate in short-term perspectives. It is a great long-term challenge for coming years. Thank you very much. The situation in the power sector during last dozen of years, we may say that we have not had well-developed policy at the moment of accepting it by the government, because the dynamics of development in the administration is that before the document is published, the market is way ahead of it, even if the administration does its best. And this is the situation for photovoltaics, and forecasts cannot foresee what is happening in the market in all the directions. Therefore, Grzegorz Michiński, what can we expect here? Are we not in a situation when 80% of renewables of OZE in 2040 is not feasible? What should we expect? I think that technology will always be ahead of administration, and we have to take it into account. On the other side, the whole range of technological solutions is restricted. It is limited. We do not have 300 or 500 different technologies. Today, we may say we have very few scalable technologies. So the forecast may be feasible and realistic. In the end, we have political goodwill, so to say. Sometimes it kills our assumptions. I was not present when consecutive versions of PEP were drawn up, but when you look at the Excels, then you can see that it's not working well. We can't say that the analytical tool was bad. It's rather that in the end somebody said that we should change certain data here, and in the end the result is not good. And the result will not be looked into by the whole population. Only few people will know about it. We should avoid such situations. We should not have policy which aims at increasing ambitions without looking at feasibility. For example, the nuclear power plant policy. During last few years, we've been facing certain myths concerning this, and I agree that there are ideas that saying that the first SMRs will be in 2030s, that we are going to have nuclear power plant in Chorzow, and those plans are too ambitious, in my opinion. I am afraid that such ambitious goals were set based on the assumptions I have mentioned before. We should avoid such things. But I am happy that this discussion is here and that this is a very broad discussion in partnerships with NGOs, with public administration. Here, in this group, we need to have new power policy. Otherwise, we will follow only political ambitions. We should rather have realistic numbers to follow. In the end, I'd like to say that renewables policy grows irrespective of what politicians say. So it will develop no matter what are the forecasts. Is it going to be 30, 40%? I don't think so. I think it's going to be much more. But if we set certain barriers, for example, like the wind power onshore, then in the end, we will purchase power and electricity from wind power onshore, but from other countries, because it is produced in certain countries and it's cheap, and we will purchase it because it's going to be cheaper than our own energy. So we have the power market evaluating the changing costs, and we will purchase cheaper power. The coal energy will lose when confronted with renewables, and we have trans-border links, and thanks to them, we will be able to purchase cheap energy, for example, from the Iberian Peninsula. We need to be aware that here in Poland we have our mix and our prospects, our forecasts, but we are not an isolated island on the ocean. We are in a European Union system, and our Polish energy sector will find its place in the European Union system, and we will be competitive or not. The question is, what are the parameters to make our power sector competitive? Upfront investment costs is one thing, but we don't calculate them when we enter the power market, because power market evaluates only the variable, the changing costs. We would have to add 110 billion Polish zlotys we spend on fossil fuels. In a minute, we will import coal as well, according to what is going on here right now when we see the situation.
Look at the growth curve in Polish months. It may become under control at a certain point. Maybe with the new management, the situation will be solved, but let's not have too many illusions. I mean, there is geology that can't be changed. Also, we don't invest in those deposits because we simply don't have the money. So there is no one there to give more money to mining companies to conduct investments, meaning costs will grow exponentially. So, as a result, the prices on the energy market will be very different, and renewable energy will be more price competitive. All the rest will be just kind of a systemic service, just to be sure that we have energy security. Thank you very much. I am very happy that with the Instrat's report also, we are all fully aware that it's no longer easy and that the energy sector is more and more complex these days, very nuanced and in need of flexibility and measurement regarding the profitability to both customers and the Polish economy. Grzegorz Anichimowski mentioned barriers regarding the development of onshore wind farms. And actually, Polish companies are waiting for accelerated works, legislative works, including also the offshore ones, those to be on the Baltic Sea. So over to you, Ms. Bielewicz, Madam. What is the role of this energy sector in the new energy mix? Thank you very much. Actually, I'd like to share a story with you. My experience shows the following thing. I worked for many years at a think tank. Therefore, I really welcome 20 gigawatt hours of wind energy within the mix. I like that. But now, as I represent Ørsted, which is the first company that phased out fossil fuels in the world, that commercialized the wind turbines. And when I look at these numbers, 20 gigawatts in 2040, I like to think from the hindsight, what would need to happen? In terms of permits, right now, it's 18 gigawatts. So we would need 2 additional ones that would receive permits under the 3rd phase, unless within the existing permits we could generate more energy. At least 9 gigawatts right now accounts for the second wave that may be actually brought to justice. Meaning, some investors would like to question certain decisions that were made. So there is a regulatory risk involved. Now, let's move on. Well, we are left with almost 9 gigawatts. The first ones, this is the first wave, supported from clearly defined sources, CFDs, and there are also 2 other projects on the markets amounting to 2.5 gigawatts. The next auction, to be held in 2025, requires 3 projects so that it really happens. So I can see many things that would need to happen so that in the end we can speak about 20 gigawatts in 2040. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying we need to make many tangible steps to go there. Now, in terms of the first wave, let's think about the year 2030. 5.9 gigawatts. This is the value of projects which are in progress right now. And as I represent Ørsted, that right now is responsible for the construction of Baltica 2 and 3, amounting to 2.5 gigawatts. We have closed an extremely difficult tendering process for the Baltica 2. 1.5 gigawatts. It actually was initiated in parallel to the outbreak of the war in Ukraine. This was a huge challenge. Now we are moving on to the next stage, and we can see very clearly that the market and subcontractors are under the same pressure. It also applies to the supply chains, financing costs, cost of commodities. These are very serious challenges. Also, we realize that there are some solutions out there. Therefore, we believe that we need dialogue among investors. This is key. Let me quote an example. Think about the National Recovery Plan that are now renegotiated. There are special financial instruments to finance offshore wind farms. This is key when this money will be made available, because maybe the projects that are now at the phase of deployment, could they also use these funds for logistic and construction processes so that these capacities are in the end delivered until 2030? So there are many question marks. And importantly, if you think about offshore wind farms, these are powerful logistic processes. A vessel must come on time. The harbor must be ready, which requires a lot of logistic planning. So if you think about offshore wind farms, on the one hand, they will provide a lot of security, but they will also be part of the industrial policy of the country. Think about the local content. I have a bit of a different approach. I'm thinking about spending in Poland, about workplaces, offices of companies and plants that will open in Poland. Well, if all this is to happen, we want to see benefits from those investments, but that requires a dialogue, the proof of which are different offset projects that we've completed so far in the world. So offshore energy sector is an important part and can also drive a lot of development in the whole economy, and also has benefits for the environment and the communities, right? On condition that there is dialogue, right, with the industry. Indeed. We covered that topic at many meetings, and we saw examples of that in some years previously. Aleksandra Barańska, I can see that you've been listening to the comments. Now over to you. So would you like to make a reference to any of the statements we've had so far? And please also share with us the type of support that Poland is eligible to when it comes to the money managed by the European Commission. Good afternoon. Thank you. I'm very happy to be part of this event. Sorry, it seems I have an issue with the sound. The problem is that I can hear my own voice. Well, we can hear you. Well, anyway, let me give it a try. So I've been following this extremely insightful discussion, taking notes diligently. So I'd like to make a reference to where we are right now as the EU and how Poland fares. Right now, the European Commission is finalizing a new communication on new climate goals for 2040. Well, obviously, in line with Mirosz Šefčovič, the Vice President and new Commissioner for Climate, Hoekstra, said, and they committed to these goals during the hearing in the European Parliament, which is that the level of ambition is 90%, 90% to curb emissions. So to be climate neutral to 90%, that's a lot, that's ambitious. So we'll see what the modeling shows, but as part of the first step in February, an impact assessment will be published containing the picture of the current situation, including this communication document. Based on that, the new Commission will prepare legislative drafts. This is a very interesting moment, by the way. Tomorrow, Poland will have a new government, hopefully, and at the same time, next year, we will see the subsequent elections to the European Parliament, which means next year, the new European Commission will be formed. We'll see what direction it will go to and how this will translate into energy and climate policies. Now, let me go back to what we've done during this term of system. Think about AFIR, pursuant to which there are obligations put on states to extend infrastructure, the so-called green charging infrastructure for cars. But that's not it. Think also about sea vessels and sea transport. The same applies to energy efficiency. We have new goals here as well. Recently, the strategy for wind economy on shore and offshore was published. So these are just examples. A lot is going on. Now, where is Poland in all that, you might be wondering? Well, we are a bit backwarded in terms of our climate goals. Let's face it. On the one hand, the COVID-19 and the war actually helped us a little bit, because even though regulatory conditions were bad, this green energy sector kept developing, which is some silver lining that if we have more favorable circumstances and additional incentives, the growth of renewable energy could be even faster. On the other hand, the share of gas and coal within the Polish mix is still very high. And the previous speakers mentioned that very precisely, that we need to come up with a strategy to phase out fossil fuels. And that won't be easy. At the back of our heads, we need to have a fallback plan. Remember that renewable energy comes with some new challenges attached. Our energy system must be far more flexible to react to changing production of energy from wind or the sun. This is why the European Commission started a new initiative to reform the electricity market design. This is right now subject to negotiations in the European Parliament, Council and the Commission. We hope we will be able to finalize this until the end of the year. In this design, we come up with new proposals. For example, to strengthen the role of long-term contracts, but also PPAs. On the other hand, it's about supporting the technologies that increase energy system flexibility, such as storage facilities and hydrogen. And again, I heard some critical voices of these plans to expand the wind energy sector. But think about it. What's the alternative? If not fossil fuels, if not the nuclear energy, then what? We don't have much hydrogen right now, do we? So indeed, I can see many challenges here and many threats for the Polish system. The challenge is that if you increase the share of renewable energy in the system, and I'm talking about the distribution networks, but also about the transmission networks. And here, these two areas have been neglected for many years. They are fairly underinvested, and it requires a lot of expenditure. We recently also published an action plan for grid development. And that's indeed a challenge. So feel free to use our proposals. One of them is easier procedures to issue permits, accelerated procedures, coming up with one-stop shops where entities can obtain permits quickly in order to expand their grids as soon as possible, so that energy can be indeed used. Right now, and you know that perfectly well, there are many projects which are declined. They can't be connected to the grid simply because the grid is inefficient. So at the EU level, we have very ambitious goals and high aspirations also regarding the time horizon. In terms of the support, definitely the EU offers many possibilities, like the recovery plan, but also cohesion funds, or the Just Transition Fund, Modernization and Innovation Fund, to quote just a few, or Horizon Europe. So there are many opportunities to gain funding. Therefore, I'd like to throw the ball now to Poland. What could Poland do to meet these goals? And now let me refer to an example. If you think about that 2040 plan, which is very ambitious, which is totally totally far from the current reality. Right now, we see the revision of national plans for climate and energy. And Poland actually is one of the member states that haven't submitted the plan at all. So indeed, Poland will need to step up to revise its forecasts and to propose a new plan with new goals that will be in line with the goals published in the EU. We are still waiting for the plan. We hope it will be submitted soon. And that's it from me. Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, we are also counting on that. We hope that these updated plans will see the light. Now, any ideas on what's going on this end? Will it be treated as a priority? Sir, is it a question to me, if possible? Well, I do hope so. We've come up with a proposal. I'm talking about the Civic Coalition and our Civic Institute. But it was presented under the premises of, under the umbrella of the Civic Coalition that now is forming the new government. Now, we assume that in 2030, up to 2030, we will move using the pathway presented by Instrat, which is the ambitious RES plan, starting with the market situation, so that we have an optimum mix, energy mix, and can satisfy our own demand individually on our own. We'd like to see imports limited because we want to have our own energy. I said before that you can have different plans, but in the end, you're confronted with the reality. And the market will require a very different approach. And you can see that clearly today. Just think about this phrase of the turbine scoop, where 6.5 terawatt-hours from wind farms has been actually imported from other countries through the synchronic connection with Germany, mainly. So we do consume that energy, but it's not ours. And it's this energy that brought spot markets to low levels. As a result, we would purchase this cheap energy on spot markets from different countries because it was more expensive in Poland. Now, if you observe forward contracts on the commodity market exchange, you will see that mostly they are combined of renewable energy sources, and they are only complemented with other energy products from different sources, such as power plants like the one in Połaniec that wanted on its own to have a forward contract for next year. If they came up with this option, the price would be much higher than the prices observable right now, about 500 more PLN. This means we need to confront this. These are the facts. So the only reasonable solution is to step up the development of renewables in Poland in such a way that won't lead to the growing problem of curtailment, meaning all the systemic grid solution, a market for flexibilities. We need to focus more on capacity instruments as well, not only energy instruments, that they will only optimize the situation. And we need to answer the question what we should do with the existing assets, conventional ones. And I guess it's not a question that is faced just by Poland and coal, because it will be a question for the gas industry as well in the next year or two. After all, huge gas units can't work on the base load anymore in the future, but only during peak times. So how, with the existing market instruments, can we avoid a situation that they will be switched off, that they will be decommissioned? We want them to provide us with the power to keep up the stability of the system irrespective of the weather conditions. And I think this by far is the most important question today. Only with having an answer to that question can we design and plan anything further, because only then can we answer the question whether such assets can be operated and how. And here I'm making also a reference to the European market design. I actually welcome all the proposals such as the PPA or CFDs. But to have a true CFD, you need to have a difference. So either you have a fluid market, the base one, so that you can have a benchmark. Without it, either it will be somehow artificially created by some instruments. Well, 80% of the participants could place orders at any price. Then we will be in serious troubles because they will be secured by CFDs. Therefore, speaking about nuclear power plants, we need to know that it's a huge challenge because the European Commission right now, in our opinion, has no idea how to shape a proper business model for the nuclear power plants. A business model, that's what I mean. So what's the value that will actually decide on whether we want or fail to build this power plant? And it's not the price. So that means we need to find a different type of a value that will be used as a benchmark. And only then can we answer the question whether it makes sense or not, or in which area it makes sense, and so on and so forth. We can't focus on those instruments that will be very expensive. And, well, I think CFDs for a power plant that will be built for over 10 years is the most expensive option.
This is a very good picture of the situation. We cannot introduce CFDs if there is no difference, if there is no market. If we have introduced the market, the stock exchange obligo, most probably we will have an increase of prices on the commodity exchange, because right now energy commodity exchange is a place for trade for producers of renewables. However, we will be able to discuss it later. I would just want to signal that after the discussion, we will still have time for questions and answers, for Q&A session. So if you have any questions to our panelists, please, when there is time for it, you will receive microphone and you will be able to ask them. Grzegorz mentioned the price signals here, and we should remember that the coming years for shaping prices will define further trends for how the situation will look like. Most probably, we will face the situation where the power sector will be marketable, and we will have price signals which will cause dissatisfaction among customers, among the end user. We know that goals are very ambitious long-term, and it means that there will be a group of people who will be dissatisfied because they will have to move to other energy sources to have a profitable activities. It is going to be a big problem. That's true. Public support for energy transition will not be easy to maintain. There are several reasons. The more green energy on the market, the more difficult it is to gain such sources, and the more difficult it is to have public support for it. There is also the place of residential heating in all this picture. The place of it is not obvious. However, I care about emphasizing residential heating and heating in general, because this is a subject which is not in the center of discussion in Poland. This challenge is very big. There are certain boundaries of growth for heating in residential heating in households. So this is the question to the Institute. How do you see the balance among the individual sources of heat and systemic heat? What is the direction for further development? The report is our first modeling for heat production. It is quite simplified and generalized. However, we do take into consideration production of heat in households and at the systemic level. It is very important, and it is priority in nature. When we talk about hydrogen economy, we can discuss conclusions. Conclusions are not very optimistic, and we have the business model here, which makes sense in the 30s when there is lots of renewables. Heat pumps today are most efficient from the point of view of our systems, the most efficient way of transition, especially in households. We have individual coal and natural gas burning in a household, in individual household, and it is not efficient, and it is not also good for a climate and for public health in general. It is a type of crisis which is with us here, and it will be with us as long as such type of heat sources are with us. So the model shows rapid development of heat pumps in households. It is linked to securing the peak capacities. It's not that we need it all the time. In winter, we do have lots of wind energy, but there are certain days when we have the peak demand. This change is necessary from the point of systemic heat. Cogeneration is developed here towards biomass, and heat pumps are not that reasonable here. Heat pumps are good in houses which want to move out from coal burning, and cogeneration is the most efficient method to secure the peak demand. The situation is complex here. We do not take into consideration gaining heat from sewage, from server rooms. So we do not take into consideration this in residential heating in cities. However, we should take it into consideration in further models because this is going to be important and significant in 2030s. In 2030s, we will not be able to produce as much coal as we need, and we need to look for other sources of heating. This risk may be mitigated by a rapid phase out of natural gas in households and movement towards heat pumps. We also need to go towards heat storage at individual and systemic levels because it is significant for flexibility. Flexibility is another chapter which can be discussed during another panel or another conference. I can see that Mr. Arak, director of the Polish Economic Institute, verifies costs in the report. Costs, costs, and costs once again. From the point of view of economy, what is the optimum moment for Polish economy to phase out coal, natural gas, and other fossil fuels? Is it possible today to pinpoint such a moment in time? This is a very difficult question. We could do it today. What's the problem? We can just turn off the power plants and we wait for renewables to replace them and respond to the demand. We have to say that economic growth is linked to greenhouse gas emissions. We are still at the level of 2004. We do not reduce emissions in the overall picture because we increase energy consumption. And even if we reduce greenhouse gas emissions because we have increased electricity consumption, we are still at the level of 2004. We have data centers, we have new services, we have new industry branches. It all uses up more energy. We also have electric cars, but electric cars are propelled by energy gained from coal. We need to have the perspective of energy gap, where we will not be able to supply energy to meet the demand. Our economy, and we hope all here to have it developed further, needs energy for functioning. This question is very important, and we can imagine the deployment of a scenario when we phase out fossil fuels rapidly, but we will not be able to guarantee any level of economic growth at such scenario. At certain point in the past, we looked at the basket of certain indicators concerning ambitions and goals for greenhouse gas emissions reduction and forecasts from other countries, forecasts of their fossil fuel phase-out and climate neutrality. We reached the conclusion and goals for Poland up to 2006. We wanted to follow ambitious path of Western countries, and we knew that in 2056 we could reach climate neutrality based on historic data. But it does not mean that we have total phase out of fossil fuels in 2056. Before 2050, we may reach certain ambitious goals, but this scenario is still very risky, even for countries which have better risk management, which have better corporate governance in public institutions, which are prepared in a better way to it compared to Poland, no matter what is the per capita growth. Consequently, this discussion in Poland will take more time. In recent years, it was a peekaboo game with the European Commission. We we are not discussing the ambitious goals. It's rather that we are discussing how to achieve them and in what time perspective. So setting goals is nice. However, we need a more realistic approach to really achieve them. I agree that the scenario is conservative. Maybe it's not up to date. However, it is still more ambitious than other ideas in our public debate. Maybe not here in this room today, but we encounter such ideas. Due to this reason, I believe that this decision will result, first of all, from social agreement and not from mathematical analysis or political forecasts. All the mechanisms that are introduced by the European Commission are to support further acceleration of coal phase-out. Right now, mining coal is not profitable. Import is profitable. However, it also triggers subsidies. And for certain reasons, we are still functioning in this way in our energy system. Additionally, we regulate prices so that the end consumer cannot see the total cost. And despite all this work, the energy companies start suggesting that beyond 2030, there is no economic future for their coal blocks. And this is the birth of corporate governance. Yes, so consequently, this narration for social agreement changes, in my opinion, due to the fact that we are all end consumers and we could feel the energy crisis in our houses. We follow the discussion. We have this traditional energy taken from coal in Poland. However, we can see that maybe it is not a good path. Ms. Joanna, how business can balance all the duties, all the doubts of our end users? This is the question to Ms. Joanna Wizbielewicz. What are the consequences for Polish people, how to mitigate such consequences, how business can mitigate it, how business can make energy transition develop in a just way? This question is very difficult, and I am convinced that business is only one piece of this puzzle. I believe that we have a certain vision where the company is to gain money, to earn money, but there's another idea that company is here to take care of their employees and the environment. It's not only there to earn money, but also to have its impact on local communities, to have impact on lives of their employees and on all the shareholders. and the environment it functions in. And in a situation when we have a natural disaster, conflicts, the role of companies should not be discussed at all. It's obvious. Right now, in companies, we are facing a polycrisis. We are discussing not only climate change and the need for just transition and the need for energy transition. There's no one simple answer. And depending on what we are focusing on, for example, ZEPAC worked on the transition strategy. It's not one-to-one. There are employees who were working in mining, and the situation is not as easy as we could see, so that they will just have professional transformations, certain trainings, and they will find another employment. It's not that easy. We need to develop social capital. Certain projects are successful and certain are not. We had a German project where miners were to be trained for medical assistance workers, and they failed. The Herten city developed hydrogen economy. Even 7-8 years ago, this city invested in startups and companies to find solutions which were to offer new workplaces and new technologies. When we look at the context of Konin, we can see that Instrat had broad cooperation with ZEPAC to find local potential there. They talked to people to understand their needs. The Ørsted company, together with PGE, Power Ocean Wind, we are working on a small project in Choczewo community. This is a community which takes energy from wind. We have transformator on onshore station, and there we employed experts for social participation. We engaged local community, and we offered 1 million Polish zlotys a year. This is the second installment for projects created by local citizens. There are people who are committed to their projects. They create projects which are intervention projects in terms of the social situation and environment situation, and there are also projects which are long-term projects. Social capital is developed, community is looked into, and this is the element which is successful there. It is a small project, that's true, but it's successful. To have offshore energy as an industrial policy, we should ask a question. What is the impact of this investment on port infrastructure? What is its impact on new workplaces? What is its impact on the hydrogen industry? We know that projects powered to X from green hydrogen are not profitable, therefore we need to work on them to be. From the perspective of 30 years of development of offshore wind energy, we can say that the first offshore wind was 5 gigawatt, and now we can construct offshore farms which are much stronger. So this is a spectacular leap in renewables, and this is 30 years perspective. So we may see that we already have one technology that is well developed, it's commercialized, it's operating, and it's competitive to conventional energy sources. There's another question. When we look at the costs, we can see that this challenge is enormous, the challenge of looking for new renewables. But if it is the driving force, then we will have money for investments, but we need to look at the return on investment. We need to have investments with good return. We hear that it's good to have policy with a feedback loop to distribute profits. We had financial instruments assisting the redistribution of profits, and it was a good instrument for gaining social support because individual people who were under pressure in mining regions received alternative solution, and that was a tool for incentives. So we know that the challenges are huge, but we have some lessons learned.
Well, actually, the whole energy sector is one big challenge, isn't it? It's a one big story and narrative, and yet we need to bring this panel to an end. But there is one more task for you in the end, not an easy one. On our lab, we can see the new report of the nearing net zero economy. One of them assumes 64% of RES in the share of the energy mix of Poland. Now, I know that the new Prime Minister, Prime Tusk, that is now holding his address, whether he focused on energy transition and when we would like to make it happen. As we started this discussion, as far as I know, he didn't mention that topic, or at least he did, but in a different context. Wind turbines as an alternative energy source. So, my task for you, one sentence of a recommendation, please. Tomorrow, the new government will start their work. They will have their new priorities. In your opinion, what should they start with? What? Their new ministers will come to ministries. Michał Smoleń, first, over to you. What is recommendation number one? Well, contrary to what you may think, I don't want to speak in details. Rather, I'd like to say strong climate leadership. Many good things have already happened last year. There will be still many difficult tasks ahead of us, but we need proper leadership, the leadership that communicates with the society and builds support. Otherwise, it will never happen. We will have curtailment, or we will have grids that you can't connect to anymore. So we need strong political leadership. That's what we need for sure. Other people will write proper legal drafts, but it needs to start with strong political leadership. Otherwise, we will have more affairs, scoops, and controversial problems. Grzegorz Nichimowski, one recommendation from you, sir. Well, most of all, I guess they should communicate the truth to society. They should never cheat. Discuss and take into account what we already have. After all, we have publicly available reports on the adequacy of our generation. In 2030, operators publish that. Everyone can check the forecast that 2030 are forecasted to where we will have 2,000 hours of energy deficit in the grid. So let's start with that. This could be a departure point first, the current challenges that need to be faced. And we already talked about the manner of how this could be addressed. We need to have a strong hub that will coordinate all these works. Good news is that there are many feedbacks in this energy transition and many low-hanging fruit that we simply need to pick and achieve those feedbacks. I'm talking about PV. There we need to add also wind and the other way around and so on and so forth. The same applies to the flexibility, which is crucially central. And yet it can be faced and solved, but we need to have proper vision and, on the other hand, proper determination. Aleksandra Barańska. Now, what would be your European perspective on that, straight from Brussels, the largest challenge? Well, I'd like to strike a more pragmatic note. My piece of advice would be as follows. Poland requires a revolution. We need a quick transition. But in order to make it happen, we need clear, stable regulatory framework so that it's clear to investors that they can invest in Poland and that they can succeed in completing their investments. So they need proper certainty and predictability. That's the one thing. And the other thing, the transition that needs to happen quickly, it has to have a human face. We must not forget about those that will be affected by the transition. So yes, there is the regulator side, but a regular citizen maybe doesn't understand the threats and the reasons behind the transition, which means it has to be properly explained. And the risks must be shown properly and addressed. So there are funds that can be used to make the transition happen. Thank you. Joanna Wispielewicz. Well, I encourage to engage in a dialogue with all stakeholders, not only in our industry. We need to make this dialogue as broad as possible. Every party can have a say and can have an answer to some questions that can be handy. Piotr Arak? Well, I've been thinking, listening to what the predecessors said. I like that we are asked to speak openly about the reality that we will be facing in next years. But I guess I am a person that is focused on an institution. Remember, we are in Warsaw. It's the former Russian partition. There is a lot of red tape in here that we are struggling here, which is the relic of the Tsar era. I guess institutions play a big role, and they are necessary. And if you look at the current makeup of companies and oversight, including energy companies, and how decisions are made on the climate policy and economic policy as such. Well, from that perspective, I think we should have a committee for energy transition, which should have a place in the Council of Ministers. I mean, there are many reasons. I'm not saying that one agency could solve all the problems, but frequently we have an issue with cooperation. It's a horizontal issue. If you appoint a team, normally you don't want the problem to be solved. But this time I want it to be different. We need a commission. I mean, that happened to the commission that dealt with digitization. I'm looking here at Piotr Woźny, who actually looked after this area some time ago. So I guess the time has come to really be serious about it. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, do you have any questions? Please raise your hand if you wish to ask a question.
If I switch to English, my name is Nils Malskar from the Danish Embassy, and you kind of stole my question by already providing an answer there at the end, Mr. Arak. But from hearing your discussion and the presentation before, it's pretty clear to me the value of this kind of analysis and this sober overview of the facts of the energy system to the discussion, that it really raises it. And that's been the lessons in Denmark from the last 40 years, also from what Joanna is speaking about from Ørsted, is that the Danish Energy Agency played a major role in providing a baseline, a foundation for these good decisions to be taken from, something that the discussion was clearly enlightened by. Although politicians argued with it all the time, they at least argued with the same points in their back pocket. So I just want to hear from your perspectives, what kind of a place does an institute that could provide that baseline on a more, from a national level, what kind of a place does that have in solving all these issues that you're putting forward, especially in terms of providing some kind of a baseline, some scenarios that are reasonable to work from? Thank you.
Okay, so I was po polsku czy po angielsku?
Should I speak English or Polish? Polish, of course. It will be translated. Okay, in that case, I would say the following. Instrat actually proposes to come up with an agency that deals with energy transition. I am not personally a fan that each problem should be solved by a newly appointed institution, because it normally doesn't mean that old institutions are eliminated. And this was off the mic, sorry. So I am quite skeptical sometimes to such solutions. Plus, people who are far away from decision-making are not always the most adequate people to deal with that. Sometimes there are other options that can be more efficient, but unfortunately in Poland it works better. So I wouldn't overestimate the role of objective data. I can find anyone to you who will now say, oh, look at who sponsored that. These data are definitely false. I don't agree, and it's probably biased and driven by some lobbyists. And I know I've been confronted with such views many times. On my own, I work at a Brussels agency that deals with climate policy, and every time we hear the same voices. In the discussion, people just say, whether given analysis is credible or not, because you always should look at different sponsors, like the German government can sponsor some analyses, and then some people claim reports are not objective anymore. So you can always be criticized. Therefore, it still matters to come up with robust analyses. What we don't have in Poland, what we are missing, is proper coordination. I know that all areas are important. One of them is education, of course, but also investments, economic growth. Without investment, there will be no economic growth. And we also need to have proper consumption. And if you look at the year 2050, there will be a larger share of renewables. That means we need to make up for it somehow from the viewpoint of the GDP. So if this is the main strategy of the European Commission, how come Poland is not treating it seriously enough? Well, I think the state should be more active. We should also compile different competences that are fragmented across the board. Certain things can't be done by a little NGO, so the state support is important, but I also value that we hear different voices and different opinions. A big value of our work also is that we are open. We openly write what our assumptions are, technical, cost assumptions. Everyone can have a look and you know where our conclusions come from. Of course, you may question some assumptions, like saying that we are saying that only 5% of conventional power will be enough in 2050. Well, it's an assumption, but what is missing in the government scenarios are the assumptions. We don't know clearly what are the limitations, what are the prices that they take into account. Recently, they actually provided prices, but publicly they never proposed any alternative pathways. Even at the request, they don't share details, unfortunately. So indeed, we had a situation where we asked for data and the price was 80 euros, for example, but at the company like Orlen, it was 140. So there were very big differences between price assumptions and also some contradictions. So we do need more and more discussion, including different perspectives. Michał Hetmański, can you hear me well? Yes? Well, thank you very much, Piotr, for this. I'm sure you are in a great situation because you lead a public think tank, right? That's, as far as I know, it's how you describe yourselves. We are a little NGO, and we are honored to be funded by different philanthropic, charitable organizations, but also the EU. But we don't want the private sector to be involved in funding because we don't want them to bias our mission. We want to be transparent, and we think it's a best practice. We publish everything very clearly on the website, in the report, and we hope that with this new opening, with the new Polish government, of course, certain interest groups, state companies or suppliers will still have an impact. After all, they want their interests to be taken into account. But we need to remember about transparency and about some conflict of interests. That was the weak spot of the previous government. We have one more question. Wojciech Lewandowski, the European Bank of Reconstruction and Recovery. Well, our bank deals with climate policy issues. We are a financial institution, which means we always look at the costs. And we heard some comments about the costs here. I personally have been dealing with these issues for some years now, but what I miss in Poland is that the costs are not broken down to different funding sources, and we need such a discussion. We heard that the recovery plan for Poland, that the money will be unblocked finally, that the first advance payments will be made, and that there would be more and more funds from the EU coming to Poland. And it's great also to have as a guest representative of the Commission. I'm wondering, to what extent do you think that in the subsequent revisions of strategic documents, that cost component will be included in such a way that we can better estimate and predict the type of sources and technologies that will be funded by individual envelopes where we see some deficiency, and what type of capital would be mobilized in which areas. This is a big pain point, that in the discussion we focus on the public funds without including the fact that they can also mobilize private investments. And so not only public sources can be used to fund the transition. That's it. Thank you. Would any one of you like to answer? Yes, I would like to address one point. I know very well this 2014-2020 MFF. I've been part of a monitoring committee of structural funds. So when you think about those returnable investments or potential involvement of capital from structural funds and private funds, well, by representing a company that invests in renewables like offshore wind farms, I have no idea what funds are included in the recovery plan, what projects were allocated, and what envelopes there are inside, even though I tried to obtain such information. And I thought that especially those returnable instruments where the private capital is to be involved, well, I think this should be consulted in the first place with the potential beneficiaries. Therefore, I really encourage always to engage in a dialogue. So really, this should be verified whether companies can at all apply for these funds. Thank you very much. Michał, yes, I fully agree with that. And it's a huge planning effort, especially given that the transition should also affect other sectors. Our model is optimized based on price signals, let's call them. So we must be aware that on the real market, many price signals are non-existent, like attractivity of having a heat pump at home means that we also need to also comply with ETS costs. But of course, private households will not be fully exposed to such costs in the years to come. Hence, there is a big gap. So to some extent, we will develop the market, but at the same time, we will need to come up with support instruments, keeping at the back of our head the risks which come attached. Like, for example, that households have PV installations, and now they are protected against price flexibility. So these are the hurdles that we will be facing. So I really am not jealous of the huge task that will need to be faced by the new government. They will need to verify the price, the model, and look at the available funding. If I could just say in the end that talking about the costs, we talked about a funding framework. Well, actually, this is a challenge. Right now, this is the end of 2023, so there is not much time left for spending this money. So remember, the money has to be used quickly, but it also has to be used wisely because the money is limited. We talked about the recovery plan, of course, about the cohesion fund and other sources. So in the end, the new government will need to be very strategic. So on the one hand, there are the EU money, but also national money. But anyways, this will not be enough to cover this transition because the needs are much higher. So we will need to come up with new, more innovative financial instruments to encourage private investors to support this transition. Precisely. This is what I wanted to say, that actually you hit the right point, because if you think about the social contributions, about the ZUS, which is the Polish social institution, and they are close to bankrupt. They may be close to bankruptcy. Also, if you look at the debt, the public debt, and the debts of private households, this can be deteriorated. And at the same time, we know that prices will be different in the future. Also, economic activity will be different. We can't estimate and forecast everything. So, actually, the outcome of the estimates sometimes can be harmful. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I guess that this is the end. So let's update our conclusions soon. We are wondering which pathway Poland will pursue. I have my own favorite. So a big thank you goes to
Piotr Arak, Aleksandra Barańska, Grzegorz Onichimowski, Michał Smoleń, Joanna Wizbielewicz. Thank you very much.
Szanowni Państwo, tym
Ladies and gentlemen, consequently, this is the end of the official part of our meeting. Thank you for your participation. I'd like to remind you that you will find the report on our website, instrat.pl, and those who are here with us are warmly invited for the break.